Hey everybody, welcome to the channel. Michael Noland here, and tonight we're going to talk about the brand new remix, the 2022 remix of the Beatles' masterpiece, the Revolver album. Now, we're not only going to discuss this release, but I'm going to do a track-by-track analysis of this wonderful release. Now, I'm going to cover each and every track in turn, except for Taxman. I already covered Taxman in a previous video. If you haven't seen that video, take a look at that one right after you see this one. Tonight, I'm not only going to be comparing the brand new remix of the album to the original stereo mix, actually the 2009 remaster of the original stereo mix, but I'm also going to compare those two to the mono release as well. And you know what? This is not a case of winner takes all. There are absolutely gold mixes to be found in all three versions of this album. And somewhere in this video, I'll even give you a final tally, at least a final tally as far as I'm concerned. Now, I really want to hear from you guys as we go through this analysis. I want to know, do you agree with me? Now, my analysis is based on the overall blend of each mix, not necessarily the fancy-dancy stuff you hear in the stereo mix, okay? The overall blend and what comes across as Beatles music will be the deciding factor. And I'll even try to explain how they went about to get these blends. All right, so with all of that in mind, the very first song up to discuss is the magnificent Eleanor Rigby. You know, this is my favorite Beatle cut of all time. If I'm pushed to the wall, this is the song I would choose as my favorite Beatles song. And I can tell you all three mixes do an excellent job on this song. First, we're going to discuss the original stereo mix, the remastered 2009 in all of these cases, all right? So when I say original stereo mix, you'll know that I'm talking about the remastered version of this album as remastered in 2009, based on the original stereo mixes. All right, so first up, the original stereo mix to Eleanor Rigby. Here we have the orchestrational elements of this song, the octet that's playing, being on the left-hand side of your stereo spectrum, with Paul's voice on the right hand. Now, Paul's voice does jump in at one point, and very jarringly. I always thought that was a real jarring transition from that right stereo field where he's singing, and then all of a sudden, this centralized, real jarring, up, almost clicked in kind of vocal. Now, this is an excellent example of the Beatles not getting it right in their approach to mixing for stereo. And you know, the engineers who mixed the stereo albums also admitted that they would mix these stereo albums in a matter of an hour or two, whereas they would spend days, if not weeks, on the mono mixes, getting it exactly right. And this is one of the songs that suffers from that exact approach. But now we get to the new remix. This is the second song that I am going to review on this album. As I've said, I've already talked about Taxman, so we're up to Eleanor Rigby, and I gotta tell you, the orchestration, the octet, the stringed octet that is placed in this stereo mix. You hear pairs of these instruments in the stereo spectrum all over the place. You feel like you're actually in the room. And as far as Paul's vocals go, they're now centralized. We don't have that jarring transition. And you know what? What they've done is they've brought the volume, and we're going to talk about how they do this in several of the cuts tonight. They brought Paul's actual volume down, and they've recompressed those vocals to make it stand out in that more expansive mix they've got going on. This is a winner, clear and cut. What an amazing mix this is. As far as the mono mix goes on this song, you know what? All the elements are there. And if you like Paul's vocals right up front in front of your face, this is going to be the mix for you. The orchestra is crisp and clear and well placed in a dynamic position, and we'll talk more about that later on tonight as well. And so as a mono mix, this is a masterpiece. The only thing that I would criticize is that the orchestra, although well placed in a dynamic position, because of where it's placed in the stereo spectrum, it just doesn't sound as dynamic. The winner, as far as I'm concerned, of these three mixes, barely mixing out the mono mix, would be the 2022 remix. Next up, I'm Only Sleeping by John Lennon. So with the original stereo mix, we hear pretty much the same approach that we hear on Taxman, then Eleanor Rigby, and then this song, I'm Only Sleeping. Again, we have all the instrumentation on my left-hand side, I'm hearing, with John's vocals and all the vocals just crammed on the right-hand side of the stereo spectrum, and then to kind of give it some sort of stereo feel to it, they place that backwards recorded guitar right in the center. That's well placed and I like it. It's a little loud in the mix, but it's well placed. Now with the new remix, there's a little bit of a change. Of course, there's a lusher stereo feel to the remix, and John's vocals, instead of being to the right, aren't centralized like you would think on a brand new remix, but kept slightly to the right and then brought down as far as volume. My first A and B comparison, I gotta tell you, I liked the original vocal volume of the stereo mix compared to this. But you know, the more I listened to it, I started hearing the song. What's the song about? It's John. I mean, he's sleepy, he's tired, and bringing that vocal down into the mix, and yet you hear every word, again, because of compression, to make it stand out. It doesn't get buried, and somehow it makes it a better recording even. And then that backwards guitar is pulled slightly to the left at first and then re-centralized, although not quite as prominent, and I think the general mix is better for it. As far as the mono mix goes, I hear pretty much the same thing done on a mono level. This is a wonderful mix as well, and again, it is a toss-up between the mono mix and the 2022 mix, and again, I'm going to give it to the 2022 remix because the changes and the way they handled the stereo field on this song better represents what the damn song is about to begin with. Next up, Love You Too by George Harrison, and on the original stereo mix, again, we hear all the Indian music to our left with George primarily on the right. A couple of times there's this stabbing instrumentation that is almost centralized and some percussion to the right, and we get a better stereo feel than the previous songs on these, but this particular mix is an improvement over what we've heard so far. Now in the 2022 remix, we hear all of those Indian instruments brought into the center field, a narrow stereo field, and I even hear a almost quick delay at the end to almost snap it to the right. And of course, George's vocals are brought to the center field again. And this is wonderful. This is a great remix. But the thing that really makes this track stand out is the evenness you hear in the sitar. Somebody has done an amazing amount of compression and fader writing to get that sound to sound so even. The original stereo mix sounding very uneven. That sitar jumps all over the sonic spectrum, but here it lies right where you need it to be, and you get every single tone from that instrument that you would expect. You know, the mono version of this song is wonderful. It beats the original stereo mix, no doubt, but in the end, the blend, where the instruments sound in the room, I prefer slightly on the new 2022 stereo remix. All right, so next up is Here, There, and Everywhere. On the original stereo mix, I gotta tell you, this is a wonderful mix. This doesn't sound so lopsided. Somebody did some great thinking, or at least happenstance really worked in the Beatles' favor this time. And you know what really is so endearing about this mix is Paul McCartney's wonderful double-tracked voice. In other words, they recorded his voice twice on two separate occasions on two tracks. And he tries to sing them as identically as you can, but nobody can be that perfect. What happens is this is an old studio trick that helps thicken the lead vocal. This recording is one of the best examples of how to do that exactly right. Now in the 2022 remix, they have this wonderful, beautiful stereo spectrum, but everything seems to be more demure. They only use one of Paul's vocals, or if they're using both of those double-tracked vocals, they've centralized them so much and there is enough delay on them that they tend to almost vanish in the mix to me. And those wonderful low harmonies, love never dies, right? They're almost hidden in this mix. Also, there's a bassiness to this mix that doesn't sound quite right to me. However, you've got to keep in mind that they have mixed this song to fit in with the new 2022 remixed album. And I think that's one of the strengths of what is essentially a weaker remix, but it works better when you just listen to the album from track to track. But the individual track in this case suffers. Now the mono mix is much better than the 2022 remix as far as I'm concerned. Very well blended. Maybe, and you remember, blend was very important when I started this video, maybe the most well blended mix out of the three. But because of the effect of the double tracking of Paul McCartney's vocals and some great finger snapping in the last few seconds of that song that has somehow mysteriously disappeared on the other two mixes. Shame on you guys. You know, they're not supposed to be removing anything. And they have done that a couple of times on this album. But in the end, for the first time tonight, the original stereo mix wins in my opinion. Now with Yellow Submarine, the Beatles return to some old form, unfortunately, and we hear most of the instrumentation on the left, Ringo's voice on the right, and when the special effects come into the song in the centralized position, that at least gives it a much wider stereo spectrum, and it helps. And even in the end, they throw some backing vocals counter to Ringo on the mix, and that even sounds even better. With those saving graces and the strength of Ringo's voice, this is actually not a bad mix, especially when you compare it to the 2022 remix. You know, to my ears, what they've done is they've taken what we heard on the hard left and the hard right with the original and just closed them up a little bit, and then with some delay fed to the other to give it kind of a narrow stereo feel. Ringo's voice is brought down and compressed, but this time still slightly to the right. It doesn't stand out like they did. This is one of the oldest tricks in the book. And you know all of those wonderful answering lines from Paul? You know, Ringo sings something and then he sings in high register. They have been so buried in this remix, it's almost unforgivable. Now, the blend, once again, on the mono is absolutely fabulous. But this particular cut seems to lack punch to my ears. I don't know if it's been mixed down in volume or if there's been compression to some of the instrumentation. I'm going to give this a further listen to, and if anything jumps to mind, I'll let you guys know in the future. But you know, for such a wonderful blend on this mix, and you know, this can be adjusted very easily. Turn up your volume, folks. If it was just the blend, this would be the winner. But I've got to choose the original stereo mix, believe it or not, once again, mainly because of Ringo's wonderful vocal approach. He is so Ringo, and on the other two mixes, they almost seem to mix the Ringo out of him. All right, we're up to She Said, one of my very favorite John Lennon songs, and on the original mix, there is no apologies here. Man, it's like the Beatles arrived on a couple of songs on this original album. I mean, stereophonically speaking. There's nothing wrong with this mix. It is wonderful, and we're gonna come back to my explanation as we discuss the next two mixes of this song. First of all, 2022 remix. The first thing you notice that's wrong is the attack and the clearness of Ringo's drums. He's been buried into this mix, and the whole mix is, although probably a superior mix by today's standards, this song is not a generic song, and we're going to talk about that here in a second. Paul's bass is mixed into oblivion on this mix and muddy sounding to me. And that was done, I'm sure, by graphic equalization. They have brought down some of the mid frequencies of his instrument, and his bass gets lost. As far as the mono version goes, this is where I want to talk about the song, what the song is about, what it meant to everybody who listened to this song. This song should never have been mixed in mono, as far as I'm concerned. This is a 3D song. It was based on John listening to actor Peter Fonda spout nonsense because Peter Fonda was on acid at the time, and it made John very paranoid because he was on acid at the time. This is a 3D song. This is one of John Lennon's very best songs, and the original stereo mix wins, hands down. All right, so next up, Good Day Sunshine. On the original mix, here we have the bass and the drums on the left-hand side with a wonderful piano on the right-hand side, a wonderful cymbal flourish by Ringo in the intro, and even some nice percussive sounds on the right-hand side. And what happens is you have a pretty exciting stereo mix. It's a little jarring, but not as bad as some of the other mixes we've already discussed. I think the 2022 remix would beat it. It's a better blend. It has a more even approach, although that wonderful cymbal flourish we hear in the original remix has been tamed far too much. And out of all of the songs on the album that have been remixed to kind of match the rest of the album, this one suffers that transition far less than the others. This is a good remix, and I think it slightly beats the original stereo mix, but it's the mono mix that rules the universe in this particular case. The blend is wonderful, and by the way, all of these mono mixes, they're wonderful mixes. There's only one or two that I was slightly disappointed in. But in this case, and again, we get to the song structure, what the song is all about. You know, this song sounds like it should have been recorded in mono. And the blend on this mix is the best job they have done on the whole mono remix as far as I'm concerned. All right, so we're up to And Your Bird Can Sing. The original stereo mix has always been a clunker as far as I'm concerned. Not only does it have that lopsided sound, but here's John's lead vocals over on your right-hand side, right? And you got Paul's bass over on the right-hand side, a busy bass that gets buried because the vocals are busy. That's a bad choice. Never liked this mix. I think because of this very mix, this has never been one of my favorite John Lennon songs. We're gonna talk about that in just a second. So surely we're gonna get a better remix than this one. Let's talk about the 2022 remix. First of all, a nice, wonderful blend, again, aimed at being uniform with the sound of the album Revolver. But Paul's bass is brought way too far down, even to the point of being muddy at points in this remix. I don't like it. And you know, the problem that I said between Paul and John's vocals and bass is even further exaggerated on this mix. Well, then what about the mono mix? The mono mix of this song is my least favorite of the mono mixes. Way too muddy. I don't hear any clarity at all in this mix. There's almost a graininess to the sound of this particular mix that I don't care for. So the winner by default is the original mix from Revolver. Next up, one of Paul McCartney's very best songs he ever wrote, For No One. Unfortunately, with the original stereo mix, we have a really lopsided feel to this song and this really brash harpsichord on one side of the stereo spectrum. Of course, the saving grace of this mix was the horn solo. It is wonderfully mixed. It's a little too far to the left, but it is very clearly heard, and the strength of Paul McCartney's vocals on this mix is wonderful. But in the 2022 remix, finally, that annoying harpsichord has been tamed and brought into a much better blended stereophonic field. With Paul's vocals again brought down, the recompressed yet clearly heard, this is a wonderful mix. With the mono mix, everything sounds way too brash. This would be the second worst mono mix of the entire batch, in my opinion. If you want to know exactly what I mean, listen for the harpsichord and how it almost crashes. And of course, by crashing, I mean way too much distortion on that instrument. Hell, to my ears, even the horn solo is distorted on that mix. Next up, the original stereo mix of Dr. Robert, and once again, for some strange reason, the engineers decided to mix John's vocals on the right side and again Paul's bass on that side, and to me, both of them come into conflict and you don't get to hear the vocals and the bass play off of each other. But now with the 2022 remix, everything is placed exactly where it should be. Now it is placed so perfectly, folks. Dig this. This is the second song by John Lennon on this album I never really cared for, but this mix has thoroughly changed my mind about this song. This is a wonderful song, guys. I know you guys are probably out there going, well, duh. Yeah, it's a great song. John Lennon wrote it. But it was always considered a more minor piece for me for some reason. In my opinion, folks, this song just needed a good mix to begin with. And the mono mix, another winner. Wonderfully done. This is one of the best balanced mono mixes I've ever heard in my life. So I've got to give this song a tie between the 2022 remix and the wonderful mono version, with a slight leaning to the 2022 stereo remix, only because it was that remix that made me reconsider this song. Next up, I Want to Tell You by George Harrison, one of my very favorite George Harrison songs, and that ought to tell you something, because this song is such a good song that I liked it despite the original stereo mix. Again, all the things that we've discussed, a very lopsided stereo blend, uneven right from the beginning, and only the excellent musicianship and the wonderfulness of this song saves this mix. Now, the 2022 stereo remix is a much better improvement, no doubt. But where is Paul's bass? It's again buried in this mix. And I'm hearing points of distortion when they get into Ringo's drum rolls and that high-end piano flourish in the song when it comes in and out. No, by far, the mono mix is the best mix for this song. This is the way we should have heard it to begin with. Again, it beats it on blend and dynamics, and I told you we'd talk about dynamics. The best mono mixes in general, in rock or any kind of music, is when the engineers know how to dynamically place those instrumentations. They can't be all of a sudden featured over on the right-hand side or on the left-hand side like you can do in stereo. So here you have to be very careful to place their volumes and their tones. You have to adjust a lot of stuff to get a mono mix right. And when the mono mix is right on this brand new release, it is golden, folks. All right, another biggie from Paul McCartney, Got to Get You Into My Life. You know, the original stereo mix on this song has always bugged me. Those brash horns on the right side. You feel like when you're listening to them, your head's kind of like 5 pounds heavier on that side. A very lopsided mix. Now, the 2022 remix fixes all of this stuff. As a matter of fact, this is the one song where they've brought a vocal in central, brought it down in volume, compressed it just enough to stand out in the mix, because it's on this song that Paul hits those extremely high notes. I want to find that, right? He's really singing at the top registers. And then when he starts that, ooh, this is the mix where all of those have been tamed. They don't jump out at you like they do in the original stereo mix. This is perfection, or should I say near perfection, because when you hear the mono mix, you'll know what perfection is all about. This song, even its style, belongs in mono, doesn't it? Yes, it has a heavy concept to it. He's talking about marijuana. He wants it in his life. This was a pretty bold subject to write about in a pop song. But they got away with it because the Beatles performed it so cheerfully, most people didn't even get the real meaning of this song. But when you get to the mono mix of this song, there's where the punch really exists. This song comes to life like you've never heard it. As a matter of fact, this is my favorite mono mix of the entire album. Okay, next up, the final song on the album, and that's Tomorrow Never Knows by John Lennon. Now, the original stereo mix is a masterpiece by anybody's ears. They pulled so many studio tricks that this was a fully realized song in every single way. I love this stereo mix. As a matter of fact, Tomorrow Never Knows is a bare second to Paul's magnificent Eleanor Rigby when it comes to song strength on this album. In the 2022 mix, we hear all the things that you would see an engineer today do to this mix. They have tamed it. They have brought it into a more narrow stereo field, and everything sounds so perfect that it's almost boring. It's generic, folks. They should never have tried to tame this song. The mono mix isn't any better. I mean, it's a fine mix as far as mono mixes go. But once again, like she said, this is a 3D song if there ever was one. And they achieved the 3D effect on the very first stereo mix, and then they perfected it with the 2009 remaster of that original stereo mix. So in my next video, I'll be doing a complete analysis on the various takes and rehearsals that came with this brand new 2022 release of Revolver. And we'll be getting into them quite heavily because there are some amazing things that are really quite a bit of an eye-opener. We discussed how much of an eye-opener the 1-minute cut of Yellow Submarine with John Lennon singing it with his guitar. There are some really nice things to talk about in that. Of course, I want to thank everybody for watching the video. Give us a thumbs up if you liked it, and all you have to do is hit that subscribe to the tribe button, hit that top bell notification, and you'll be notified of all my future videos. That helps the YouTube algorithm do its job, folks, and the channel grows as a result. In the meantime, until I get to that video, why don't you watch one of these videos? I'm Michael Noland, we are The Tribe, and I'll see you in my next video.